I've heard from a lot of different white belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that when they go to class, they feel overwhelmed with technique. Maybe it's a couple sequences in a move. Maybe it's just a single move, but there's so many details. Take the triangle, for example. You simply could explain it as you take your legs, you wrap it around them with one arm in and one arm out, and you squeeze. But it's not that simple, right? Because in addition to squeezing, you have to figure out how to control their posture, how to rotate. In addition to how to rotate, which parts of your body are you using to rotate? Are you taking your arm? Are you putting it underneath their arm? Are you putting it underneath their leg? Are you taking your other foot? Are you posting off the mat? What about your right hand or your left hand? Are you posting on your shin? Are you grabbing on your foot? What about the gi? Are you pulling on the gi? All these factors start to come into play, and then it's like, on top of this is only one move, because how do we even get there? We got to set it up, and then we got to think about the street. And it's like, oh, at this point, I just never going to learn all this. But that's not what you should be thinking about as a white belt. And this is how to not be overwhelmed with this situation I laid out. First of all, just give up and forget. No, well, kind of. What do I mean by this? Give up on remembering every single specific detail, except that you're going to forget a bunch of the things. But the knowledge is not learned the same way it's learned in school, where you have to put it back on a test. The way you're going to learn this is by basically ingraining it into your muscle memory over time. So during class, try your best to do the mechanics and put your body in the correct position. And in the moment, don't be thinking about, and now if you can help it, look, you're still a white belt, maybe you're a black belt, I have no idea. But if you can help it, don't think about specifically where to put every single portion of your body, because in a real live match, there are going to be different variations on the technique. Instead, think about the principle governing why it will work. What do I mean by this? Let's take a sweep, for example. Why does it work? No matter which variation you're using, it works because you're able to take your body weight at a different angle. Maybe it's, say for example, in the hip bump sweep, you're bringing your hips up above your opponent, turning at an angle so that way they fall over and you go from being on bottom to being on top. Other sweeps, you're going to be taking your hips, say for example sweeps from deep half guard, and going underneath your opponent, turning, and again going from a bottom position to a top position. And in each one of these moves, there's a bunch of different variations on the grips, which is why maybe you'll hear it from one instructor one way and from a different instructor another way. Both are right, it's just a different variation. So if you're focused on, okay, well, coach 1 told me to put my grips here, here, and here, and coach 2 told me to put my grips here, here, and here, think about the commonalities across the moves, because when you're actually doing a match, those are the things you're going to be able to think about. It's not, sometimes you'll be able to think about, okay, I remember when I put my grip here and here, I have way more success. But usually that part should have been drilled into your muscle memory enough times. Now, this is why we start off drilling slow, so that way you can think about putting your hands in the right place for the first few times. And then, as you do it again and again and again, you're no longer thinking about where to put your hands in the right place because you've already done it. It's sort of ingrained into your muscle memory. What you can think about are the concepts and the principles. Because if you have your hands in the right place, but you're not applying correct leverage and positioning and pressure, then it's going to look right, but it's not going to feel right. And that's usually going to come down to if there's space between you and your opponent, or whether or not you have the correct angle in order to apply the leverage. This is very broad speaking, but you're going to have to break it down to the individual move, and basically it's going to come down to, why is your move not working? Get good and figure it out. Sorry, but that's how it is going to come down to in jiu-jitsu. But don't get discouraged if you can't remember all the variations, because the truth of the matter is, you don't remember all the variations in the middle of a match. You do the variations because you are thinking about the concepts. It's like, oh, I'm applying this concept, but my opponent reacted in a different way. And when my opponent reacts in that different way, this variation is going to be what presents itself. This is why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is so dynamic, and why it's honestly a little bit hard to figure out how to drill, because you're essentially simulating the middle of a fight, like a certain, okay, we're in a fight, he's grabbing, we're doing this, and you take a snapshot, like a couple seconds of the fight, and then you drill that one thing and you try to put it all together, and it can be a little bit complicated. Well, it can be a lot of it complicated. This is why we talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and we practice it, and why we love it. So that's how not to get overwhelmed. Realize that the variations come from muscle memory and practice. If you focus on the principles, the commonalities of why the moves are working, That can be what you're thinking about in the middle of a match. You can also be thinking about strategy things in the middle of a match. For example, hold the posture down, and let them up, and that's when I do my sweep. Those are things like timing. You can think about that in the middle of a match, but you're not necessarily going to be thinking about right arm over, grabs, left hand, hand configuration, gable grip this way, right leg locked over top of left leg. Like, it's just too much. You're not going to have the processing power to do that. But don't get lost in the sauce, don't get discouraged, and don't get overwhelmed, because eventually you'll have drilled this stuff enough times, you'll ingrained it in your muscle memory enough times to where you can do a move, and then you can slow it down and be like, huh, why do I sometimes put my hand here versus here? And you realize it's based off of a different reaction on your opponent. And that's when you can understand it up here. So a lot of people have it backwards, where you think you have to understand it in your mind first, and that's why you get overwhelmed. But in reality, you don't have to understand it in your mind at all. You just have to keep showing up and keep training, and that'll come second. You can literally understand it in your mind after you've burned it into your muscle memory. And then you practice it, and then you do it for yourself in slow motion, and you're like, oh, that's why I do it. So don't get discouraged. Don't get overwhelmed. And do leave me comments down below to support the YouTube channel. Peace.